The Trinity Rodman Washington Spirit contract saga has reached new levels of mess, and it makes me want to pull my hair out and yell. Welcome to this week's edition of The Late Sub. I am your host, Claire Watkins. It is Wednesday, December 10th, and today we are going long on the reports of the multi-year, multi-million-dollar offer made by the Washington Spirit for Trinity Rodman that the NWSL vetoed. Everything that we've heard in terms of the reports, let's put a real timeline together of what we're looking at, what the deadlines are, what the implications of this deal are, and how the NWSL got to this point where it is once again in danger of losing one of its biggest stars. Let's jump in. So the Trinity Rodman contract saga, which we've been talking about off and on all year, we knew she was in a contract year this year, big free agency moment for her, has come home to roost for not only the Washington Spirit, but the NWSL, perhaps Rodman herself. It feels like the league is running out of time to come up with a solution to retain her in a year that has seen many headlines about talent loss, especially at the U.S. Women's National Team level. We're seeing procedures and policies be protected over perhaps one of the biggest players in the game in what could be a defining decision by the NWSL that at the very least will impact, let's say, the next 5 years of the league, if not longer. So here's what we know so far. I'm sure everyone has been following along on the ins and outs of some of the reported contract offers for Rodman, what she's looking at, what the league's position is. But we're going to try to use this moment, since it's been a couple of days since the news broke, to compile as much of this information in one place as possible. So hopefully if you listen to this episode, you feel like you are caught up. And then also we will be talking about some of the frustrations that I'm feeling on a multiple different levels about how this is going. So here's what we know so far. Trinity Rodman, first of all, baseline, is out of contract. Her agent says that she is weighing multiple offers from multiple leagues. The first report by The Athletic in November specifically said that 3 English WSL sides are interested in Rodman, perhaps making a transfer move in January. Rodman is then asked about her future at NWSL Championship Weekend, which the Spirit were playing in. She says she wants to get through the game first, and her focus this year has been as much about getting healthy as thinking about a new contract. That same week, The Athletic also reports that Rodman has a huge offer from DC Power, which is a USL Super League club that outmatches anything the Spirit could counter under the current NWSL salary cap. Now, the Super League does not operate under a salary cap, despite having some maybe other infrastructure things that are not as high level as the NWSL. The championship game at the end of November, goes the way that it goes. Washington loses. Rodman comes in as a second half sub. She's limited, as we all know, to kind of the second half appearance due to something of a freak MCL sprain suffered weeks prior. We also see in the final kick of the game sort of the scary reminder that her lower back issues that have been plaguing her for years and also just came to a huge head last year and this year have not completely gone away, as much as we'd like that to be true. At the same time, NWSL Commissioner Jessica Berman is publicly defending the salary cap, saying that that mechanism is part of what makes the league so competitive, so unique in the global landscape. And she hammers really hard that compensation is only one piece of why players make decisions, and that this focus on the salary cap is not necessarily as relevant as people on the outside might think, because players make decisions for a variety of different reasons. This all happens. Rodman clearly after the game just wants to go away for a little bit. She needs a little bit of a break. She needs to get her body right, her mind right, and then start thinking about what comes next. It's quiet for a while, like a week or two, until last week. Bloomberg breaks that the Spirit have made a multi-year, multi-million-dollar offer to Rodman with a backloaded structure that the league itself vetoed under the reasoning that the offer violates what they called the spirit of the rules. The NWSL Players Association immediately shoots back. They file a public grievance to be taken to arbitration over that ruling by the league, saying that the NWSL to this day still cannot identify which rules exactly the offer breaks, and that unilateral rejections of reasonable contract terms by the league itself sets a very dangerous precedent for transactions going forward. The NWSL is these players' direct employers due to the league's single entity structure. I think this is the defense that the league makes. They're kind of asserting that they can do this whenever they want. The players contract with the league, and therefore the league is the arbiter of whether contracts are reasonable. Now, Meg Linehan noted this week that the last time the league used this defense, they lost. They used this same single entity defense of basically saying that the league gets to make these choices on clubs' behalves from time to time because players directly contract with the league. They used that in the Olivia Moultrie case, which people might recall the league did not win. The one that preceded an official U18 entry mechanism, that ruling went against the NWSL, saying that clubs essentially still have governance over their own decisions, despite the fact that they're a single entity structure and that players directly contract with the league. So here's what we know about that contract offer, because it sounds like, again, I'm parsing this from the public reporting, that the league is not just like saying, oh, we don't want a big deal for Rodman. It's just that they don't like this particular deal. So let's talk about all of the reporting that's come out there and what we know, because it seems like it's a big one. There's a lot going on here. It's 4 years, set at an average of what The Athletic called significantly more than $1 million per year in a backload structure, meaning that every single year the price goes up. People see this in other leagues. I think, like, famously, there's, been a couple of these in baseball, which does not operate under a salary cap. But you also see this in capped leagues as well, where you set, kind of your percentage based on what you anticipate the cap to be. Cap goes up every year. That percentage stays the same while the number goes up. And it's a big one. If we're talking about over $1 million a year, or even using the word significantly, this year's salary cap was placed at around, 3.1 million. The current CBA has the base salary cap growing to 5.1 million in 2030. The league asserts here that those backloaded deals, the deal that goes up every subsequent year, gives Rodman a raise that outpaces the current cap base. The Spirit are projecting that the available funds are going to outpace that set base. They're not hiding that part. This is part of why there's a disagreement here. The Spirit are not acting like, they're not obfuscating the fact that they are outpacing the base projection under the current CBA. They are saying, okay, let's look at the other mechanisms here. There's the revenue share mechanism, which is theoretically putting money on top of the base salary cap through the CBA, which does not put, there's no cap spending on that. That could grow. They're also looking at a possible there will be a new TV deal set to be negotiated before the 2028 season. What they are projecting is that will be a lucrative TV deal, perhaps even more lucrative than the one the NWSL is currently under, which, as we know, those kinds of things also reopen CBAs, reopen salary cap negotiations. We see this all the time. You get the money infusion through, we've seen the expansion fee money infusion. Now we're going to probably see before 2028 the TV money infusion. The Spirit are going, hey, having to do a deal under the current salary cap base is actually kind of ridiculous. Let's look at what we think is actually going to happen here. The league believes those projections by the Spirit are unreasonable, going so far as a source telling The Athletic earlier this week, I believe, that if the deal were only just for $1 million a year, which still would be, like I said, about a third of the current salary cap, the league would have signed off on that immediately. So I feel like there's some push-pull from the league here being like, it's not that it's a big deal, it's that it's this big of a deal, or it's that the backloading is hard to parse out what's going to actually literally happen versus what the Spirit think are going to happen. And like I said, the Spirit and the PA say they have not been told to this day specifically what rule the offer breaks, especially because the current CBA explicitly states that there is no set maximum salary under the current rules. And the understanding is that if Washington wants to give Trinity Rodman a majority of their cap space, they should be allowed to do so. And just because the league thinks it's a quote unquote bad deal does not give them the governance right to veto it. The league says that the Spirit don't have an answer for how they'll field a team should the cap not go up like they project. The Spirit have a kill clause in the contract itself to answer for that, which the league then said indicated that they didn't think that meant it was a serious offer at all, and it was trying to go around salary cap rules. And so this kill clause that the Spirit think actually solves their problem is one of the hinges that the league doesn't like, because they say you wouldn't have a kill clause if it was a serious offer. It's a lot. Rodman seemed to do a club visit in Madrid last week per her agent's appearance on CBS and her own social media. Spirit leadership said yesterday, Tuesday, that they're working pretty much daily with the board of governors to come up with a creative solution, and time is running out. The January transfer window in Europe opens in just a few weeks. The 2026 NWSL preseason begins not that much longer than that. There's a season to play. And Rodman at this moment still needs to, frankly, kind of be thinking about rehabbing within a club structure, not only just to keep her knee healthy as she's still recovering from that MCL sprain, but also continuing to work on the things that have been plaguing her with her back, which could cause much larger issues for her career if those are not managed properly. This is all a good indicator that all of this has already gone way too far. Timing is off. The deals are too wonky. The sides are too far away from each other. But the Rodman willingness to sign the Washington mega deal indicates that she is genuinely open to staying in the NWSL, which I think should have been, step number one for everyone involved. The fact that we're having this conversation about a player that could go to Europe but wants to stay, the biggest star in the league last year and probably for years to come in one of the biggest growing markets in the NWSL for a team that is good and exciting and fun to watch. She wants to stay. That's base number one. And the fact that we're kind of glossing over that because of all this other ridiculousness really kind of bums me out. But she wants to be compensated for her importance not only to the Spirit, but to the league at large, which I think you have to look at the labor position here and say, that's super fair. The league seems to be very against a straight abolishment of the salary cap, or even contemplating the kind of astronomical heights that the revenue share or reopening of the cap could occur with this other money coming in. Again, we're seeing aggressive expansion. We're seeing TV deals. They don't seem to want to share the Spirit's bullishness on what's coming up in the future. And I absolutely agree with the NWSLPA that the league doesn't kind of get to do that. You don't get to relitigate the CBA every time a contract offer comes across your desk. And if there are these loopholes within the CBA, those need to be hammered out between the league and the Players Association. This kind of open-endedness where basically, if they look at these projections and the kind of these real world ideas about where the money is going to be, and they feel like every single time they get to relitigate the contract that they've already negotiated with the Players Association, that is not reasonable governance. And I'm really interested to see what the arbitration comes out with in terms of a result. The disagreement about cap projections honestly reminds me right now of the rhetoric coming out of the ongoing WNBA CBA negotiations, and they are out of contract right now. So why are we having out of contract conversations about a CBA that already exists and very specifically does not set maximums for any individual deal that you want to give to a player? It's incredibly unfair for the league to open this can of worms. And I think this is the union's point, which is that this is more than just one player. They are not arguing just on Rodman's behalf, but it's unfair to players coming in or staying in the NWSL to feel like the league itself can reshape any contract, even if they've already signed off on this CBA that has been established. And if they want to veto an offer, I think that it makes sense that you can't open up that idea of a process where the league basically gets to make those decisions unilaterally, especially when, as I've said before, they cannot concretely say what rule this offer violates. Commissioner Jessica Berman chose kind of a nuclear option here, but she used it kind of as if it were simply a piece of the puzzle. And I think it's kind of ridiculous to keep shifting and poking and changing the concepts of the rules just because a club wants to make a deal that I think everyone agrees is kind of crazy. And this is not the first time that retention issues have been a problem in this league. It's not reasonable for the league to be this reactionary to it, for it to drag on this long. This is not just this year of talent loss. This is multiple years of multiple stars who have had to look elsewhere because of the restrictive rules under which the NWSL is controlled. It feels like the NWSL's commitment to bureaucracy over a functioning individual club system in which teams get to make their own decisions is what's holding everything back. And it's a tale as old as time. This has been true since the very beginning of this league. And it's spurring this negotiation until it's not actually possible to retain Rodman at all, just because Rodman has soccer to play. She's got to get in a club environment. She's got to keep working on her U.S. Women's National Team goals. And basically, again, injury rehab for Rodman has to be the number one. And she needs to be in a stable environment for that to happen. And if the Spirit believe that Rodman is worth most of their cap, they have the option to offer her that money. And I think that the league has to come up with more. And I think this is, again, the point of the PA grievance, that they have to come up with more of a defense to say why they can't. And I don't even think Washington, as sort of outlandish as this contract is wrong to think that keeping a player like Rodman actually impacts the bottom line. Again, this is all reminds me again of a CBA negotiation where you've got the player side betting on success and you've got the league side betting not on success. And it frustrates me to think again that with each individual contract, the league feels like they can renegotiate this thing. There's a reason why contracts have terms. There's a reason why contracts have rules. And this idea that the league every single time gets to bet the under to try to limit what teams can do drives me nuts because, like I said, Rodman impacts the bottom line. A league with Rodman versus a league without Rodman has different funding projections over the next 5 years. Frankly, the Spirit, as we've seen over the last year, they drive TV viewership. 3 of the top 5 most watched NWSL matches on ABC and ESPN featured the Washington Spirit. They crossed the 1 million viewer mark in the championship, which I do think is partially because of the teams that were in it, the star power that we saw between Gotham and the Washington Spirit. And, it's frustrating because you feel like the league almost benefits from this swirling amount of reports about what Rodman's going to do. There was a lot of hype before this championship game because Rodman was making decisions about her future. The Spirit are similar, seeing major inroads with consistent attendance. They have become the premier soccer product in the city of Washington, D.C. This whole concept of betting on the future is you see a team betting on a future with Rodman in it, and you see a league betting on a future with her not in it. And that feels like the great impasse, which again is so frustrating when you have a superstar who wants to stay. And I've been covering this league long enough. I am so sick of the creative accounting. The one that sticks out to me, the last time the league was put in this particular position, they failed to retain their star. And I think you actually can look at a lot of different touch points, whether it's, Thompson, Girma. You could go back to Katarina Macario deciding not to enter into the NWSL draft. But the one that sticks out to me is Sam Kerr. She left in 2019 after a whole year of the league going back and forth about what kind of financial mitigations they were going to put into, the contract structure to allow them to retain a star. They come up with this complicated allocation money system that no longer even exists because it was such a half measure that was so complicated and had such restrictive rules even back then. And guess what? She still left because it was too unstable, too complicated. Her earnings were too restricted and she wanted to go to a different environment. This is still this conversation of teams who don't want to spend holding this deal back. And the fact that they have a say at all in individual team governance is going to shape the NWSL's future for years to come. And it's really, really frustrating from the media side to see this happen over and over and over again. And I don't know, all these different mechanisms that they could come up with, a designated player, a luxury tax, whatever soft approach the Board of Governors comes up with is going to be a half measure again. And more importantly, it is probably going to be too late. It is almost the middle of December and this still hasn't been hashed out. And the Spirit are pushing for actual change in terms of the way that these contracts are approached in the NWSL. I'm sure the Spirit would like the NWSL to call them tomorrow and say, we're getting rid of the cap entirely. And the fact that this has become such a larger wedge issue, I think actually makes it harder for them to get a literal deal done surrounding this one individual player. And I think in many ways, the Spirit, the PA, Rodman herself is okay with that if it opens things up for other players in the future and ultimately Rodman herself. But they're running out of time. And that part is so frustrating too. And I also frankly have some frustrations about the structure of this deal as we understand it. And some of the other things we're hearing, with Rodman and some of these other offers, the Super League, is she visiting Real Madrid? Is that serious? Do we feel like that's serious care for a soccer player's career? Whenever this contract negotiation became all about money, and I wholly support a player pushing for that as much as possible. I'm so frustrated with the league for pushing against this as much as they have. As someone who cares a lot about Rodman's actual soccer future, that feels caught in the balance here too. Maybe that does mean that this deal isn't good enough. I want us to get to the point where I can talk about how wild I think this actual contract offer is. Is Washington really prepared to sell all the awesome players they currently have that help them get back to, back-to-back championship games? What does happen if the cap constraints are too high? Just because I think they deserve a chance to see this through doesn't mean that it's not something that I think is also worth talking about in the kind of normal cycle of discussing kind of a wild star deal, right? Was there a slimmer deal possible that didn't force the league's hand as much, that as Washington probably ultimately wants to for their own future, just because they do want that foundational change to compensation structures, rather than maybe, again, a simpler deal, one that is a little bit more league friendly, that Rodman might be able to agree to, that's going to keep their star around. Maybe there are those other considerations. Is there such a reluctance to give the NWSL any sort of a win on this, to budge on this, that it gets in the way of the deal actually getting done? If the cap isn't going away, what does it mean for one player to be making multiples of what their teammates have been offered on the scale of what sounds like the highest value contract in women's sports history by multiple magnitudes? What does it mean if Rodman can't get and stay consistently healthy under this? I mean, this is a lot of betting on a player that I think, again, injury concerns have to be the number one right now, in addition to all the potential. What happens if that deal goes wrong? By nature of the league's veto, has to go somewhere outside of the league where her competitive prospects aren't as good or isn't able to cultivate, American stardom with less outsized coverage. What does that mean for the trajectory of her, star career, or what we expect from Rodman? What is a star if her upward trajectory is less linear because of all of this stuff, which I would love to dig into at some point once things become more clear. I want to rage at all of those questions. I want to talk about, what this contract would mean for the Washington Spirit, would mean for Rodman herself, what some of the pros and cons of betting this much on a star player is, because I think the NWSL should let Washington make the deal that they want to make. And then we can discuss whether it makes any damn sense. That's sports. Let the NWSL participate in it. Because if a league is too in love with its own processes over the players that actually make it great, when it believes it exists to allow soccer to eventually happen rather than enjoy the actual soccer being played and wanting to support that being as good as possible, invest in everything but even bad soccer, sports governance, that's where you end up with a league that's fine, a league that's marketing itself on its competitiveness with no stars, a league that is able to talk about what's happening week in and week out, but can't compete for eyeballs on the global stage. You let the narrative get away from you. And I think the NWSL has let that happen. I am still obviously cautiously hopeful that a deal can get done. But like I said, I think allowing it to get this far is already a bad sign. And for the NWSL, that future of a league that struggles to differentiate itself because it's unwilling to bend in the face of generational talent or generational stardom, it's not a hypothetical. It's here. And it's been here. And it's been here for years. And you just have to hope that the league isn't going to make some of the same mistakes of the past. The Late Sub is part of the Just Women's Sports Network. This show is written by Claire Watkins and produced and edited by Parker Fenton. To get more of your favorite women's sports content, subscribe to the Just Women's Sports newsletter and follow Just Women's Sports across all your favorite channels.